Hello everyone, I am very glad that you're joining this story. Subscribe, like and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
I always thought my parents and I had an unbreakable bond. We weren't perfect, but we were family. They had raised me with love and care, or so I thought. That belief crumbled one evening during a tense family meeting. My mom, pale and frail from her illness, looked at me with tears in her eyes and dropped the bombshell that would change everything. "I have something to tell you," she began, her voice trembling. "You're not biologically ours. You were adopted." For a moment, the room spun. My dad sat silently, staring at the floor like he'd been waiting for this moment his whole life. I tried to process her words, but it felt like she was speaking a different language. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Her confession poured out in broken sentences. "We didn't know how to tell you," she said. "We always planned to, but then life got in the way." She avoided my eyes as she explained that they had adopted me as a baby, a secret they had intended to reveal when the time was right, a time that apparently never came. The air was thick with tension as my mind raced with questions. Why now? Why? After decades of silence, were they telling me this? That's when she added the part that made my stomach drop. "I need a kidney," she said, her voice cracking. "And we were hoping. Maybe you'd be a match." It all made sense then. This wasn't a confession born of guilt or a sudden desire to set things right. It was desperation. My adoption had been kept secret until it was convenient to reveal it, for her benefit. I looked at my dad, searching for some kind of reassurance, but he wouldn't meet my gaze. "Did you know?" I asked, my voice sharp. He nodded silently, his shoulders slumping under the weight of his guilt. I turned back to my mom, anger bubbling to the surface. "So, you're only telling me this because you need something from me?" "It's not like that," she insisted, but her words rang hollow. "We love you. You're our child, no matter what." But how could I believe her? Everything I thought I knew about my life had just been turned upside down, and the people I trusted most had been hiding the truth from me for my entire existence. That night, I lay awake, replaying the conversation over and over in my head. The people who raised me, who were supposed to love me unconditionally, had kept such a monumental secret from me, and now they wanted me to save her life. I felt trapped between a sense of obligation and a deep, festering resentment that I couldn't ignore. This was just the beginning of a journey that would test everything I thought I knew about family, identity, and love. The days after my mom's confession were a blur of emotions. I felt like I was living in someone else's skin, replaying every childhood memory with a new lens. The bedtime stories, the birthday parties, the words "I love you" from my parents, it all felt tainted now, like there was a hidden subtext I had been too naive to notice. I cornered my dad a few days later, desperate for clarity. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" I asked, my voice raw with frustration. "Did you think I couldn't handle it?" He sighed heavily, sitting down at the kitchen table and rubbing his temples. "It wasn't like that," he said. "We always planned to tell you when you were old enough to understand. But then, life kept moving. And by the time you were old enough, we were afraid it would hurt you too much." "Hurt me too much?" I repeated bitterly. "You don't think finding out like this hurt more?" Meanwhile, my mom's health was declining rapidly. She had been on dialysis for months, and her doctors had told her time was running out. A kidney transplant was her only chance, and it was clear she was clinging to the hope that I could be her savior. "We didn't want to tell you like this," my dad said when I brought it up again, his tone almost pleading. "But we're out of options." His words felt empty, like they were more about justifying their actions than addressing my feelings. Despite the growing rift between us, I couldn't ignore my mom's condition. I felt torn between my anger and my sense of duty. They had given me a life filled with love and opportunities, even if it had been built on a foundation of lies. Reluctantly, I agreed to get tested to see if I could be a donor. I tried to tell myself it was the right thing to do, that it wasn't about them but about the values they had instilled in me. Yet deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about saving my mom. It was about saving the version of my family I thought I knew. The testing process was invasive and stressful. I spent hours at the hospital, filling out forms, undergoing blood tests, and answering a barrage of medical questions. Each time I signed my name or rolled up my sleeve, I felt the weight of what I was doing. "Are you sure about this?" a nurse asked me one day as she prepped me for yet another round of tests. "Donating an organ is a big decision. I don't think I have a choice," I replied, though the words tasted bitter. The truth was, I felt trapped. If I didn't go through with this, what kind of person would that make me? When the results finally came back, I was a match. It should have been a relief, but instead, it deepened the pit in my stomach. I had the power to save my mom's life, but at what cost to my own sense of self? I told my parents the news that evening. My dad looked genuinely relieved, but my mom's reaction caught me off guard. Instead of the gratitude I expected, there was hesitation. "We need to talk more about this," she said, her voice uneasy. Her response left me confused and suspicious. What was holding her back? After everything that had happened, why wasn't she leaping at the chance to accept my help? Something wasn't adding up, and I was determined to find out what it was. The day I walked into the hospital to begin testing, I felt like I was carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders. It wasn't just about the tests, it was about everything the tests represented. My relationship with my parents, my sense of self, and my anger about their deception were all tangled up in this process. The nurse started with routine questions, her tone neutral but kind. "Age?" she asked. 29, I replied. "Any significant medical history?" she continued. I hesitated, feeling an odd dissonance answering questions about my health when I didn't even know my biological family's medical background. After what felt like hours of forms and consultations, the blood tests began. The needle pricks were nothing compared to the emotional weight of the moment. I couldn't stop thinking, what if I wasn't a match? And what if I was? The waiting period for the results stretched endlessly. I tried to distract myself with work and friends, but my mind kept returning to the hospital and my mom's frail figure. I replayed our conversations over and over, wondering if there was something I had missed, some hint about what had driven them to keep my adoption a secret for so long. When the results finally came in, I felt my stomach drop as the doctor said, "You're a match." Relief and dread hit me simultaneously. I was relieved that I could help her. Helping her felt like a way to prove I wasn't as cold or selfish as my anger might have suggested. But at the same time, the thought of undergoing surgery for a woman who had lied to me my entire life filled me with resentment I couldn't shake. I told myself this was an opportunity to rebuild our trust, to salvage the bond we once had. Maybe this is how we move forward, I thought. But even as I tried to convince myself, a small voice in the back of my mind whispered that something still didn't feel right. When I told my mom the news, I expected tears of relief or a heartfelt thank you. Instead, her reaction stunned me. She didn't cry or even smile. She looked down at her hands, her voice unsteady. "Let's wait," she said. "We should explore all options before rushing into anything." "Wait," I repeated, confused. "What other options are there?" "I'm a match, Mom. This is what you've been hoping for." She wouldn't meet my eyes. "It's not that simple," she murmured. I don't want you to feel pressured." Her words sounded reasonable on the surface, but her body language betrayed her unease. Something wasn't adding up, and her hesitation planted a seed of doubt in my mind. Was this about me, or was there something she wasn't telling me? That night, I couldn't sleep. Her reaction replayed in my head, each detail gnawing at me. My mom had been desperate enough to reveal my adoption, yet now she seemed reluctant to accept my help. What was she hiding, and why did it feel like the answers were just out of reach? I resolved to find out the truth, no matter how painful it might be. My trust in my parents had already been shattered, and I wasn't about to let their secrets continue to control my life. My mom's odd reaction to the test results wouldn't leave my mind. Every time I replayed the moment, it felt like there was something she wasn't saying, something lurking beneath the surface of her hesitation, and I couldn't let it go. Late one night, I found myself wandering through the attic of my childhood home, sifting through dusty boxes and old keepsakes. At first, I wasn't even sure what I was looking for. Maybe some proof of my past or a clue about my biological family. After what felt like hours, I came across a worn shoebox labeled simply with my name. Inside, I found a collection of papers and photographs. My heart raced as I pulled out a stack of documents, the first of which was an official-looking adoption certificate. The date matched the year I was born. Beneath it was a folded letter, yellowed with age. My hands trembled as I opened it, the handwriting unfamiliar but filled with emotion. Asterisk, "Dear my name, I hope you grow up happy and healthy. I'm doing this because I love you and want you to have a better life. Please know that giving you up was the hardest decision I've ever made. I'll always love you. Your birth mother." Asterisk. I sat there in stunned silence, rereading the letter over and over. This was the first tangible connection I had to my biological family, yet my parents had kept it from me my entire life. Why? What were they so afraid of? I continued digging through the box, finding scraps of information that only raised more questions. There was a grainy photo of a young woman holding a baby, Was this my biological mother? There was also a receipt from the adoption agency, suggesting a private adoption. The more I pieced together, the more I realized how carefully my parents had constructed a version of my life that excluded my biological family entirely. Fury bubbled up inside me. They had erased an entire part of who I was. And for what? To make it easier for themselves? To ensure I never questioned my place in their lives? And now, after years of secrets, they were coming to me for help, expecting me to act like none of this mattered. The next day, I confronted my dad with the papers. "Did you know about this?" I demanded, holding up the adoption certificate and the letter. He paled but nodded. "We thought it was best if you didn't know," he said quietly. "We wanted you to feel like you were ours, completely and fully." "But I wasn't completely yours," I snapped. "And you lied to me for years. You kept this from me." He didn't argue, which only made me angrier. "Your mother thought it was the right decision," he said. "She didn't want you to feel torn between two families. And now I feel torn between two lies." I shot back. "Did you even read this letter? She loved me. She gave me up because she thought it was what was best for me. And you just erased her from my life?" The guilt on his face was evident, but it didn't make me feel any better. For the first time, I saw my parents not as the infallible figures of my childhood, but as flawed people who had made choices that had shaped my life in ways I was only beginning to understand. As I walked away from that conversation, my resolve hardened. If they weren't going to give me the full truth, I would find it myself. I needed to know who I really was and why my mom, the woman who raised me, seemed so reluctant to accept my help. The answers were out there, and I was determined to uncover them. The tension in the house was unbearable. Every conversation with my mom felt like a battle of half-truths and evasions. But when the day came to finalize the surgery plans, everything fell apart. "It's too risky," my mom said abruptly when I brought up the next steps. She was sitting on the couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I can't let you go through that for me." Her words stopped me cold. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm a match, Mom. This is what we've been waiting for." But she wouldn't look at me. Her hands trembled slightly as she said, "You're too young to make this kind of sacrifice. I've lived my life. You have your whole future ahead of you." Her refusal felt like a slap in the face. After everything, her confession, the tests, the emotional roller coaster, she was suddenly backing out. "You didn't think about my future when you asked me to get tested," I said bitterly. She flinched but didn't respond. That was when I noticed the tears brimming in her eyes. "There's more to this than you know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then tell me," I demanded, my frustration boiling over. "What aren't you saying? Why are you so against this?" Her gaze darted to my dad, who had been sitting silently in the corner. He looked pale, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. "Not now," he said, his voice firm but uneasy. "This isn't the time." The room fell silent, thick with unspoken words. My mom shook her head, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "I'm sorry," she said softly, "but I can't accept your help." I stormed out of the house, my mind racing. Her excuse about risk didn't make sense, not when her life was on the line and I was a viable match. There was something deeper at play, something they weren't telling me. That night, I pored over the adoption papers and the letter from my biological mother again, searching for clues. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't piece together the puzzle. Why would my mom, who had raised me and loved me, suddenly refused to let me save her life? The next morning, I made a decision. If she wouldn't tell me the truth, I would find it myself. I started by reaching out to the adoption agency listed on the papers, hoping they could provide more information about my biological family. My mom's cryptic words haunted me. "There's more to this than you know." And I was determined to uncover what she was hiding, no matter how painful it might be. My mother's cryptic refusal and my father's silence only fueled my desperation to uncover the truth. The adoption papers had given me a starting point, but something still didn't add up. If they had gone to such lengths to hide my origins, what else might they be keeping from me? One night, while scrolling through forums for adoptees, I stumbled upon stories of people using DNA testing to reconnect with lost family. The idea clicked instantly. If my parents wouldn't tell me the truth, then maybe a DNA test could. I ordered a kit the same night. The process was simple: spit in a tube, mail it back, and wait. But the waiting? That was torture. Each passing day felt like an eternity as I obsessed over what the results might reveal. Finally, weeks later, the email I'd been waiting for arrived. "Your DNA results are ready." My hands shook as I clicked the link. The first thing I noticed was confirmation of what I already knew. I wasn't biologically related to the people who raised me. But then, as I scrolled through the list of genetic matches, my stomach dropped. The name listed as my closest relative wasn't my biological mother, the woman from the adoption papers. In fact, she wasn't anywhere on the list. The implications were staggering. If I wasn't biologically related to my adoptive parents or the woman they claimed was my biological mother, then who was I? Confusion quickly gave way to anger. My parents had not only hidden my adoption, they had lied about its very foundation. The letter from my supposed biological mother, the adoption papers, even the story they told about giving me a better life. It was all a fabrication. I tried to make sense of the matches on the DNA site. There were distant relatives, second and third cousins, but no close family members that could give me immediate answers. I sent out messages to a few of the matches, hoping someone might be able to provide context. That night, I confronted my dad again. "Who am I?" I asked, holding up my phone with the DNA results. "Because according to this, the woman you said was my biological mother isn't related to me either." He looked like he'd seen a ghost. "Where did you get that?" he asked, his voice trembling. "It doesn't matter where I got it," I said. "What matters is that you've been lying to me again. I want the truth, Dad. No more excuses." He opened his mouth to respond, but then closed it again, as if struggling to find the words. "I can't," he finally said, his voice barely audible. "Not yet." "Not yet?" I shouted. "You've had my entire life to tell me the truth, and now you're still holding back. What are you so afraid of?" He didn't answer, and I stormed out, slamming the door behind me. I felt like I was unraveling, my sense of self slipping through my fingers. Who was I if even the story of my adoption was a lie? One thing was clear. I couldn't rely on my parents for answers. If I wanted to find the truth, I would have to uncover it on my own. The confrontation I'd been avoiding finally came to a head. The weight of the DNA results, and the lies they exposed, was too much to bear. I walked into my dad's study late one evening, clutching the adoption papers and the DNA report. "What aren't you telling me?" I demanded, my voice trembling. For a moment, he stared at me, his expression a mix of guilt and resignation. I half expected him to deny everything, but instead, his shoulders sagged as if he were carrying a burden too heavy to hold any longer. "It wasn't a normal adoption," he said quietly. His words hung in the air, heavy with implication. "What do you mean?" I pressed, my heart pounding. He hesitated, then began to explain. "Your biological parents, they weren't good people," he said slowly. "They were involved in things, illegal things. Your mother and I thought we were doing the right thing by taking you away from that life." "Illegal things?" I repeated, my voice rising. "What are you talking about? Drugs? Violence? What does that even mean?" He took a deep breath. "Your biological father was part of a criminal organization," he admitted. "Your biological mother wasn't directly involved, but she was tied to him in ways she couldn't escape. When you were born, there were circumstances. Your mom, your adoptive mom, found out about it and saw an opportunity to intervene." "Intervene?" I said, my anger boiling over. "You make it sound like she was rescuing me, but all you did was erase my history and lie to me for decades." He flinched at my words but didn't argue. "We thought we were protecting you," he said. "We didn't want you to grow up with that kind of influence, to be pulled into a life you couldn't escape from." "But you didn't just protect me," I said, my voice cracking. "You erased who I am. You lied about everything. My birth, my family, even the adoption itself. How could you do that and think it was okay?" My dad looked at me with tears in his eyes, and for the first time, I saw how much guilt he was carrying. "We thought we were giving you a chance at a better life," he said. "Maybe we were wrong to keep it from you, but we loved you. We still do." His confession left me reeling. On one hand, I could understand why they might have wanted to shield me from a dangerous past. But on the other, they had taken away my right to know the truth, to make my own choices about my identity. That night, I couldn't sleep. My dad's words played on a loop in my head. "We thought we were protecting you. But protecting me from what?" I needed more answers. Who were my biological parents really? What had they done that was so terrible? And why had my adoptive parents taken such extreme measures to hide the truth? I decided to keep digging, starting with the few details my dad had shared. If my biological parents had been involved in criminal activity, there had to be records, police reports, court documents, something. I wasn't sure what I would find, but I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't stop now. The truth, no matter how painful, was the only thing that could help me make sense of everything. As I tried to process the shocking truth about my adoption and my biological family, One nagging question lingered in the back of my mind. Why now? Why had my mom chosen this moment to reveal everything, just when she needed a kidney? The more I thought about it, the less her timing made sense. If she'd kept this secret for decades, why not keep it forever? The connection between her confession and her need for a transplant felt too convenient to ignore. I started to look into her medical situation more closely. I combed through her discharge papers, researched her condition online, and even reached out to her nephrologist, claiming I needed more details to understand how the donor process worked. What I discovered left me speechless. My mom had already been matched with another donor, a distant relative who had agreed to the procedure weeks before she'd even told me about my adoption. The revelation was like a punch to the gut. My willingness to undergo testing, my emotional turmoil, my desperate attempts to help, it had all been unnecessary. She had lied to me about needing my kidney. Why would she do that? Furious, I confronted her later that evening. You already found a donor, I said, throwing the medical report onto the kitchen table. Why didn't you tell me? She looked startled but quickly composed herself. I didn't want you to feel obligated, she said weakly. Obligated? I repeated, incredulous. You didn't want me to feel obligated, but you thought it was okay to drop a bombshell about my adoption and let me think I was your only hope? She avoided my eyes, fidgeting with the hem of her sweater. I was trying to do what was best for you, she said softly. I couldn't hold back anymore. You manipulated me, I said, my voice rising. You used my adoption as leverage, knowing it would make me feel guilty enough to do whatever you wanted. Her face crumpled, but I wasn't sure if it was from guilt or the realization that her plan had backfired. That's not true, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Then why didn't you tell me about the other donor? I demanded. Why did you let me think I was the only one who could save you? She had no answer. Her silence spoke volumes, confirming what I had already suspected. My mom had used my adoption not as an act of transparency, but as a tool to manipulate me into compliance. The betrayal cut deeper than any of the lies she'd told before. It wasn't just about the adoption anymore. It was about trust and how she had shattered mine completely. As I walked out of the room, I felt a strange sense of clarity. I wasn't just searching for the truth about my past anymore. I was searching for the truth about who my parents really were and how far they'd gone to keep me in the dark. For weeks, I felt like I was walking through a fog of anger and grief. My mom's betrayal wasn't just about the kidney or the adoption. It was about trust. The woman I had idolized growing up, who had been my guiding light, now seemed like a stranger who had rewritten my entire existence to suit her own needs. Every conversation with her since the donor revelation had been short and tense. I avoided her calls, kept my visits to a minimum, and poured my energy into researching my biological roots. But the avoidance only amplified the ache in my chest. I realized I couldn't move forward without confronting her directly, one last time. I showed up at her house unannounced one evening, finding her sitting in the living room, a blanket draped over her lap. The fatigue in her face made her look older, more fragile, but it didn't soften my resolve. We need to talk, I said firmly, taking a seat across from her. She nodded slowly, as if bracing herself for what was to come. I owe you that much, she said. I didn't mince words. Why didn't you trust me with the truth? I asked, my voice raw. Was it really about protecting me, or was it about protecting yourself? Her hands trembled as she placed them in her lap. It was both, she admitted. When we adopted you, I was so scared. Scared that your biological family might come back one day. Scared that you might want to leave us for them. I thought keeping it a secret was the only way to make sure we stayed a family. Her confession hit me harder than I expected. I had always thought of my mom as strong and unshakable, but now I saw her vulnerability, the fear that had driven her to make these choices. You're my child, she continued, her voice breaking. No matter where you came from, I couldn't lose you. I wanted to yell, to tell her that her actions had nearly destroyed the very bond she was trying to protect. But as I looked at her, frail and remorseful, my anger started to waver. Her love for me had been real, even if her methods were flawed. I need time, I said finally, my voice steady but firm. I can't just go back to pretending everything is okay. I need to figure out who I am, separate from all of this. Her eyes welled with tears, but she nodded. I understand, she whispered. I just hope that someday, you'll find it in your heart to forgive me. I left the house feeling lighter, but not because everything was resolved. For the first time, I felt like I was reclaiming control of my story. My mom's choices had shaped my life, but they didn't define me. The path ahead was still uncertain, but at least now, I was the one choosing how to walk it. The decision to meet my biological relatives wasn't easy, but it felt like the right step. For years, I had been living with a fragmented sense of self, unknowingly missing pieces of my story. Now, I had the chance to finally put those pieces together. We met at a small park on a warm afternoon, the setting sun casting a golden glow over everything. My biological mother, a kind but nervous woman named Teresa, was the first to embrace me. "I've dreamed about this moment for so long," she said, tears streaming down her face. My biological father, quiet and reserved, offered a tentative handshake that turned into a hug. The meeting was overwhelming, but it wasn't as painful as I had feared. Instead, it was cathartic. They shared stories about the circumstances that led to my adoption, confirming much of what my parents had told me, but with added layers of context. While they couldn't erase the choices that had been made, they gave me something I had been searching for: a sense of belonging and understanding. Meanwhile, my relationship with my adoptive parents remained strained, particularly with my mom. I visited her occasionally, but every conversation felt like walking a tightrope. She was visibly trying to make amends, but the weight of her past actions hung heavily between us. "I'm proud of you," she said one day, unprompted, "for finding the strength to uncover the truth, even if it meant confronting me." Her words were sincere, but they couldn't erase the pain. Forgiveness was one thing. Rebuilding trust was another. Still, I appreciated her effort, even if our relationship would never return to what it once was. My dad was more straightforward. "I wish we'd told you sooner," he said during one of our talks. "I see now that keeping it a secret wasn't just a mistake. It was a betrayal. I hope you can forgive us someday." His honesty made it easier to move forward with him, even if the scars of their deception remained. Looking back, this journey taught me lessons I never expected to learn. Family, I realized, isn't just about shared blood or even shared history. It's about trust, honesty, and the willingness to respect someone's right to their own story. While my parents' choices hurt me deeply, they also shaped the person I've become. Their love was real, even if flawed, and it gave me the foundation to find my own strength. Meeting my biological family didn't erase my past, but it added depth to my identity and helped me see that I could honor both parts of my life. Today, I'm moving forward, cautiously, but with hope. I've built bridges where I can, set boundaries where I need to, and most importantly, reclaimed my narrative. My life is finally my own, and that's something no secret or lie can ever take away.